Welcome to those of you just joining. People are continuing to come in, and so we'll give it just another minute before we get started. Welcome to the Center for Community Solutions webinar, Decoding the Chaos, a practical playbook for policy and funding threats. It's Thursday, April 24th, 2025. I feel like it's important these days to note the date that we are talking about and where we are sitting, because things can change moment to moment and day by day. And all of the information that we will share today is accurate as of now. A little bit of housekeeping. This is a webinar, so everyone is on mute, but the chat is open. And please submit your questions as we go, and we'll hopefully have some time at the end to answer them. As you will be able to see in the chat, closed captioning is available. Just select the button that says Show Caption to activate. And after the webinar, the recording will be available on demand both at our website, communitysolutions.com, as well as on our YouTube channel. And hopefully we will get those things up this afternoon and the slides out, or some of the slides out, a little bit later today. I'm Emily Campbell. I'm the president and CEO of the Center for Community Solutions. Looking at the folks who've joined today, I see a lot of familiar names, so happy to have you, and also some new ones that we don't know so well. So looking forward to hopefully providing some information that can help you cut through some of the noise, figure out what to focus on in what I'm sure you all will agree have been challenging times. One final thing to note before we get into it, although this is recorded, please consider this conversation to be off the record, but feel welcome to use it in your own work as you see fit. If you're anything like me, the last 3 months have felt a little bit like 3 years. We are 94 days out from Inauguration Day, January 20th, when the second Trump administration began, not even 100 days into this administration, and a truly unprecedented level of changes which have occurred over that time. We're all trying to figure out how to navigate what apparently is the new normal, but it certainly feels anything but normal. And so my hope today is to give you some practical and tactical ways to approach the challenges your organization and the community that you serve are facing or will inevitably face. Let me say at the outset that we're trying to present this information in a way which is broad and broadly applicable, but every organization's circumstances are different. So while I have some level of expertise, you all know your services, your organization, and what you're hoping to do better than I ever could, and also know the conditions on which you focus and the threats that you are facing. So feel welcome in the chat to let us know what you are seeing, hearing, and thinking. And hopefully we'll cover some broad things, but if you have specific questions, again, please feel welcome to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. As I mentioned, I'm from the Center for Community Solutions. We are an independent, nonpartisan policy and research center. And for more than 100 years, we've been a trusted source of analysis and advocacy. We focus on pragmatic problem solving in Ohio's health and human services landscape, and we work to improve community conditions and the quality of life for all Ohioans. I've been with the organization for about 18 years, as president and CEO for a little under 18 months. And one of the things that's really important to me and to Community Solutions is to bring together the data and the evidence to illuminate something important about community, to suggest sustainable solutions to our community's issues, and then to actively advocate and work with policymakers and other community leaders to try and catalyze some change. Today, we hope to answer 5 questions. We'll see how thoroughly they are answered for all of you. But at the Center for Community Solutions, we really like things in fives. We have a weekly 5 things you need to know e-newsletter that goes out most Mondays. And if you are interested in that, please subscribe on our website. But this is what we're hoping to cover today and what we hope that you will leave with at the end of the webinar. Again, I keep saying, put things in the questions, but if there are things you're wondering about which I don't cover, please feel welcome to ask a question, because I will say narrowing some of this down to what we can reasonably get through in the time we have together has been a little bit of a challenge. So we want to talk about how to figure out what to pay attention to, what is likely and what's more of a rumor, what happens if funding or programming is cut? What can we learn from past times of austerity and challenge that help us navigate this moment? And then where might the opportunity lie in the chaos? And most importantly, what is temporary and what might be irreversible? So what can we build back upon when sort of things calm down? And what are changes that are unlikely to be rolled back? So for me, I think about January 20th. It's Inauguration Day. Of course, the current environment, some of the pressures started well before then, but that's when the fire hose really opened up and it has not stopped. Maybe for you, it feels a little bit like this. You're walking a tightrope, going into the unknown. Who knows what will happen next? Maybe it feels more like this, a ship that's being battered in the storm. You're losing some of your supplies and trying to get your lifeboat someplace safe. Maybe it feels a little bit more like just too much, an overwhelming amount of information coming at you all the time, and you just want to sort of close your eyes and close your ears. Or maybe this well-known meme. It's not fine. Things are happening very quickly. No reasonable person could have foreseen what's happening now. There are immense external pressures. The pace of change is very rapid. We have a high level of uncertainty. Coming so soon on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated shutdown and all the social distancing and all the changes to services and supports that had to happen during that time. Most of us used our reserves in the past 5 years addressing those issues, and we haven't had the opportunity to build them back up. And I get it. I read Project 2025, and I'm still surprised at least once a week about what is coming out of Washington, and to a lesser extent, what is coming out of Columbus. Maybe I shouldn't be, but I am. And so learning to pivot and react very quickly is something that we all have to do in order to try and navigate these changes. So what we want to try and do is walk this tightrope, untangle some of the mess, cut through the noise, and provide some very practical suggestions about how to navigate the current environment. This is a slide that I often share at the end of a conversation or presentation, but I want to share it here at the beginning. 501c3 organizations like the Center for Community Solutions, and like many of your organizations, are nonpartisan in law, fact, and purpose. We are vital service providers, employers, and economic drivers, and charitable organizations exist to serve the public good, providing essential services on which people depend in every community across the country. The Center for Community Solutions has worked hard over decades to cultivate a nonpartisan reputation, and we guard it closely. I will be talking today a lot about political issues. I will be referring to the various parties political parties and caucuses that are in Congress and that are in the State House, and talking about positions that are taken by some policymakers. But none of this is partisan. For Community Solutions, being nonpartisan means that we examine issues based on their merits, not who put them forward, and we do not engage in any sort of partisan election activities. It also means that we are always looking for common ground and we work with the office, not necessarily the person. We work with whomever is in the office, whether we agree with them on most things or on very few things. Again, we feel that there is always opportunity to find common ground. And while, of course, we have preferences about the policymakers that we find easier or more difficult to work with, we never agree with anyone 100% of the time. And you see on your screen a few of the things that nonpartisan does not mean. Nonpartisan doesn't mean that we are always bipartisan or that issues have to be bipartisan. Being supported by both Republicans and Democrats, it doesn't mean that we are unbiased. We certainly have a point of view. It doesn't mean that we don't engage in policy processes, and it does not mean that we stay silent on issues that are important to our mission. For decades, government action and government change has largely been plodding, slow, measured, fairly predictable. Things took a long time, for better or for worse, and most change was incremental rather than transformative. It was more like the keep calm and carry on, a motto that was developed for its clear message of sober restraint. I don't think anyone can describe what is happening in Washington, D.C. these days as sober restraint. That's over. What we've moved into is a period that can be characterized more by the second poster you see, Move Fast and Break Things. This is a poster that was hung in Facebook offices around the world. It emphasizes speed, a willingness to experiment and iterate, even if it means making mistakes. And I think that's really important, even if it means making mistakes. It suggests that progress is made by pushing forward quickly, learning from failures, and adapting to new challenges. It focuses on speed and experimentation, and that is more valuable than a cautious, slow approach to change. Move fast and break things. It is something that works well when we're talking about developing or testing new software. Move fast and break things can be very harmful when we're talking about people who are impacted at the end of it. But it's a significantly and substantially different approach to making decisions and to taking action. So, how do you keep calm and carry on in a move fast and break things environment? Taking a sober assessment of risks and impact, being clear and focused, showing adaptability, and holding a little bit something back because things will continue to move fast and things will continue to be broken. So, when we talk about chaos, here are some of the things that immediately come to mind. The New York Times has a tracker of the Trump administration's major moves in the first however many days, it's up to 94 days today. If you print it out, it's 124 pages, and we are not even 100 days into this administration. So, nonprofit organizations, local government, philanthropy, the civic sector, and individuals are facing incredible external pressures. We are all operating in this uncertain environment. We didn't create it, but we have to deal with it. Of course, one of the first things we think about is the federal funding freeze and then the unfreeze. As of today, federal funding is not entirely frozen. Federal funds continue to flow, but it's a much more targeted and nuanced approach, program by program, more systematic than systemic. We've seen a lot of federal executive orders that have changed some of the landscape. Some of the ones that we've paid closest attention to do have to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI opportunities. Also, some executive orders relating to nonprofits. Frankly, we were expecting to see some earlier this week. Rumor was that on Tuesday there would be a series of executive orders relating to nonprofit status and nonprofit organizations. We didn't see them. If we had, this would have been a different presentation. Also, mass termination of federal employees, wiping out entire departments. I think this is an area where you can really see how move fast and break things works. Fire everybody, bring back who we need. We'll find out who we really need and we'll bring it back. That isn't a mistake, that is by design. Then we have the business of policymaking as usual, but in a charged environment. We knew state budget deliberations were going to be challenging. We knew the incoming Congress was eyeing cuts. It was never going to be easy. But when you layer on all of these other things on top of the standard policymaking process, it's an awful lot. And we are hearing that there is pressure from the White House for Congress to pass their budget bill by Memorial Day. So more and more coming, and we'll talk a little bit more about timing in just a few moments. So we have all of these things layering together. And when we think about the impact of federal funding and federal decisions, this is an area where Community Solutions has done quite a bit of analysis over the course of the last several months. What you see here are some graphics from a report that we released last year looking at investments in health and social services. And what you can immediately notice is that federal funding underpins close to two-thirds of the investments in health and social services that were made in Ohio in 2022 and 2023. 42 cents of every dollar allocated via the state budget originates at federal sources, $38 billion. That's more than state sales and income tax combined. Statewide in 2021, according to some other analysis that my colleagues here at Community Solutions have completed, close to 20 cents of every dollar in county budgets originated at the federal level. In Cuyahoga County, intergovernmental transfers were $388 million. It's the second largest source for Cuyahoga County's budget after property taxes and more than the local sales tax. According to a recent nonprofit landscape assessment in Northeast Ohio, $2.4 billion in government grants supported nonprofit organizations in Cuyahoga, Lake, and Geauga counties, representing 41% of total funding. It's the largest single source. And it is very clear that locally generated resources, including county levies and philanthropic dollars, are not going to be able to make up for substantial cuts that happen in the federal piece of the pie. There are immediate impacts, and then there are ripple effects. And what has happened over time is that federal funding has underpinned a lot of health and social services and many, many other supports. So here is some additional analysis where we looked at federal investment per resident by congressional district. You can imagine we hope to use this in advocacy with our congressional delegation. And what's shown on the screen is the per capita or the per resident amount of federal investment that came into each congressional district in 2021, which is the latest data that we have available. And it varies. Statewide, it's almost $5,000 for every person living in Ohio that has come in from federal sources. We also looked at federal employees. If all federal employees lost their jobs, Ohio's unemployment rate would increase by about 40%, jumping from 4.8% to 6.7%. This only includes federal government employees as designated by the U.S. Census Bureau. It includes contractors and academic institutions and other organizations that rely on federal funding to retain employees are not included. And so, of course, this number could be much, much higher. And even if funding hasn't been cut, those mass workforce reductions at the federal level mean that there may not be anyone there to process the checks. It's not an accident. Again, move fast, break things. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but one of the lessons that's coming out of this is to make sure that you are processing your payments if you do have federal funding as quickly as you can and as fast as you can to make sure that when those things are open, you can get the dollars that you are entitled to. All of this is very precariously balanced. We have lived through a prolonged period of expansion of programming, expansion of funding, of the number of nonprofits, of what our nonprofits are doing. We've added in upstream considerations, impact calculations, equity and inclusion, all of these things. It has been a period of largely growth. As the federal government paid for more, it meant that state and local public dollars and philanthropy could be deployed elsewhere, could be moved upstream, could be utilized for some of these other sources. It was almost like a federal first mentality. If the federal government would cover something, that left opportunities to do other things. That's what's changing and changing very rapidly. The federal government is essentially cutting up our credit card, and they are not going to be coming to help. If you think about this, we'd like to think about it strategically, kind of like Jenga. And it would be nice if we would carefully pull out bit by bit and piece by piece, but that's not what's happening. Huge swaths are being pulled out, and it could mean that the whole thing could crumble. But here's what I want to remind you. Even in the face of federal cuts, we still have choices. If the federal government stops funding something, the state could step in, counties could step in, cities could step in, and so could philanthropy. Now, it's not like there are dollars just sitting there waiting to be deployed. We were using all of the resources or most of the resources that we had available. Very few places have substantial reserves, but some do. And so this is a zero-sum game. And some of the conversations that we are beginning to hear about are public entities thinking about what is the most vitally important things that we need to make sure are available in our community. It may mean a shift to go back to local government or private philanthropy or donations providing some of those basic needs. As an organization that's been around for more than 100 years, when the Center for Community Solutions was founded, there was no federal income tax and government did almost nothing. Services were available scattershot. They weren't universally available, but they were supported by local dollars. We may start to see a return to that. So just because the federal government cut something, it doesn't mean that it's automatically disappearing right away. There are still opportunities to advocate for others to pick up some of that. Now, of course, it means that we have to stop doing something else because we all already had full plates. We add on top of this a attack on nonprofit organizations in general. This was a little noticed but very important executive order and memo that came out from the White House in February that has big implications. Last year, there was language in a House passed legislation at the federal level saying that the administration could suspend any organization's 501c3 status on suspicion of being a terrorist organization without any burden of proof. But this isn't the current law. That proposal died in the Senate. It has not been reintroduced. But this memo mirrors that language and could give justification for suspending any funding to non-governmental organizations, in other words, nonprofits, for, as it says, anything that is counter to the policies of the administration. As I mentioned, we were expecting this week to see some additional executive orders and federal actions around nonprofit organizations, around 501c3 status, and targeting specific organizations. But that didn't happen. And this experience is instructive because we need to be focused on what is actually happening and start to cut through some of the noise and some of the rumor. The holy grail here seems to be efficiency and a feeling that many service providers, many nonprofit organizations are inefficient at best, maybe bloated, and at worst counter to the public interest. But the vast majority of our organizations aren't being directly targeted. It's really not about us individually or the people that we are serving individually. We're too small. There's no personal vendetta. We are swept up as collateral damage. And that's very important to keep in mind. Many of us on this webinar today are threatened because of the environment, but not threatened specifically. So let's talk a little bit about how to address that environment. We promised a playbook. We want to talk about what we can do and how we can approach. I want to shift gears a little bit and get into that. Here's the playbook that the Center for Community Solutions has thought about, and we're going to walk through each of these. But as we embark on walking through these, my number one piece of advice is this. Get very clear very quickly with your leadership and with your board about what is fundamental for your organization. What is at the core of your work? What is at the core of your mission? What do you do particularly well? Ask yourself, if this particular thing went away, the organization as we know it would cease to exist. For the Center for Community Solutions, what's at the core for us is independent analysis and nonpartisan policy and advocacy work. That's really why we exist. Everything else should contribute to that, but that's really the core at what we are doing. So let's walk through each of these things in turn, starting with uncover the truth. I hinted at this a bit already. Of course, lots of threats all over the place, rumors, statements. Where are things going next? We just don't know. Until the executive order is put forth, until the legislation is introduced, until we have the language, and until it is made official, it is rumors. And so uncovering the truth is the first thing that we need to do. This is made additionally challenging because we have lots of administration officials saying lots of different things. We have lots of policymakers at the state level saying different things, and it's hard to know who to trust. And I've got to be honest, I don't even think they're all on the same page. And so it's difficult to find out what we believe. Earlier this year, we put out 5 resources that we trust when the news and information move quickly. It was written by my colleague, Tara Britton. And here are the 5 places that we turn. Be careful about taking anyone's word for it. Just because a policymaker says it does not make it true. But one of the places that we turn to are experienced journalists. Who are the people who are well embedded in reporting on what is happening among the issues in the areas that you care about, or the level of government that's most likely to impact you? What I have noticed, though, is that when I'm looking at different news sources, they all are sort of going back to the same sources and building on top of each other. But this is definitely a place to take a look. The second place are the original sources of information. This is going back and reading the executive order, reading the legislation, taking a look at where exactly did this information that's being reported on come from, and what does it actually say. Of course, we always want to look at official data from the Census Bureau and from others. Some of it is disappearing, but Community Solutions has worked hard to make sure that we preserve some of that data and information that we can utilize going forward. Talking to our partners in the community, there are a couple of great resources that you can look at, and it was just posted in the chat here. The National Council of Nonprofits, Coalition on Human Needs, the chambers, the Human Service Chambers in Franklin County, Hamilton, and the new one here in Cuyahoga County. But also relying on associations and state coalitions. There are many associations that you are all members of. Make sure that you are talking to them and listening to them, because they are able to take a broader look and get a little bit out of some of the day-to-day considerations to think about what are the things that are impacting your organization or may impact your organization. We are heavily relying on national groups to help wade through some of this. And then our job is to take that information and figure out what it means for Ohio, what it means for our organizations, the people we're seeking to serve, and our partner organizations. But those are just a few places to go. What's really important is to find the places that you can trust, to check them fairly regularly, but not all the time, because it will be there when you come back. And to try and find the right balance of concern, but not panic, because panic doesn't serve anyone well. The second thing, or the next tool in the toolbox or play in the playbook, are to consider the risks and direct impact on your organization. There is so much happening. There are so many things that we could be upset about, but not all of them have direct impacts on your organization or the people that you are seeking to serve. Along with this, it's time to think quietly and critically about what you can let go. Do you want to be able to strategically make some change, or do you want someone to force you to do it? Are there nice to have things that if your funding is threatened or if things get tighter, that you are able to let go of in order to protect, again, what's so vitally important to your organization? Again, the National Council of Nonprofits is such an excellent source here for this. And this is information that they put out earlier this week, looking at the myth versus the reality of executive branch, saying that the executive branch lacks the authority to target nonprofit organizations. That legislation did not go in place. And so there has to be a process that is gone through before some of these changes take place. But ask yourself, do you directly utilize federal funding? What is that federal funding? Have you received a notice from one of your funders? What does it say? What do you need to do to stay in compliance? Be sure to be thinking about and making sure that your filings with the state and with the IRS are up to date, because those are the kinds of things that might make an organization an easy target. But first and foremost, pay attention to the things that directly impact your organization, the people you seek to serve, and the people who work for your organization. But in this, it's really important to not go it alone. And here's an area where, amidst all of this chaos, there is opportunity to forge some new partnerships, to deepen relationships, and to have some strange partnerships. We can form new and deeper collaboration, and there's enough room for a lot of different approaches. For example, if we think about what Community Solutions is really good at, we're good at the analysis. We're good at identifying solutions. We are not great as activists, but there are lots of other partners and organizations that are very good at activating the community to speak out about things. There is enough need to go around, and we need to find ways to not necessarily build it ourselves, but to work with others who have strengths in complementary areas to do what we need to do at this moment. Another great example is a new coalition that has come to fruition, Ohio Medicaid Matters. It is a large and broad coalition that has come together for the sole purpose of working on the so-called trigger legislation, trigger language relating to Medicaid that is currently in the state budget, which I'll talk about a little bit more. These groups have come together for this temporary single purpose. We've set aside some of our differences, and there can be substantial differences. It is broad-based, but now we have a shared goal for now, and that is enough to move forward. I'd also encourage you, if you are working in a community that has a human service chamber, to take a look at joining if you haven't already, because these are opportunities for a broad-based group to come together and a great source of information and intelligence about what's happening. So there are chambers in Franklin County, in Hamilton County, and in Cuyahoga County. And we've shared in the chat where you can find more information about those. The next thing I want to talk about is something very close to my heart, which is to stop harmful changes before they go into effect. And this takes us right into advocacy. Until the processes are changed, they have to be followed. This is also where the courts have stepped in to say, you have to go through this process. There have to be waiting periods. There have been temporary stays. There have been permanent stays. Things are winding their way through. We are seeing them getting to the Supreme Court, where the ultimate decisions will be made. Whether or not those orders are followed is a conversation for a different day in an area outside my expertise, but is something that we will see. So stopping harmful changes before they go into effect. Again, this is where we talk about advocacy. And I want to remind you, I'm not an attorney, but advocacy is different than lobbying. You don't have to take my word for it. This comes directly from the IRS. And I want to highlight a few of the areas here. A 501c3 organization may engage in some lobbying, but too much lobbying activity risks a loss of tax-exempt status. Organizations may involve themselves in issues of public policy without the activity being considered as lobbying. We can educate policymakers. We can talk about issues in our community. We can even ask legislators in a limited fashion to vote one way or another. This is all explicitly permissible under the IRS rules for nonprofit organizations. Now, philanthropic funding may have prohibitions on using those dollars for lobbying. But the federal tax code contains a single sentence that defines the prohibition of partisan political activities by 501c3 charitable organizations. And it states that these organizations are prohibited from directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for elective public office. Since this is not an election year for federal or uh, state policymakers, this is a little bit easier for organizations to ensure that we are not engaging in electioneering. That is prohibited. We can always tell people to vote, but we can't tell them who to vote for. And when we think about advocacy, the margins in the US House and the US Senate are razor thin. And so this presents new advocacy opportunities. And suddenly every vote counts. And we have already seen some strange places where there's a kind of outsized influence by a small number of sitting policymakers that are able to uh, influence the outcome of policy discussions. Here in Ohio, we have a number of targets. This is probably a conversation for a different day, but working on both sides of the aisle with policymakers to identify the things that really matter to them, really matter to their constituents, and to help explain how some of these things may impact the people that they have been elected to serve. And we have to find common ground. And this is an area where the Center for Community Solutions is putting out more data and information by congressional district that should be able to be utilized by advocates and by others. We're also working to collect information about the Medicaid program by state legislative districts so that it can be used in the same way. I see there are some questions coming in, and let me take a look at those. Could academic institutions where research is being conducted be a trusted resource? Yes, that is absolutely a trusted resource and something that we turn to and look to. One of the challenges is that sometimes academic institutions don't move as quickly as some other places. They take their time to do really excellent research, but this is a place where we can find evidence for sure. What does too much lobbying mean? Is there a definition or example? Yes, there are definitions and examples. This is where we get into some of the technical aspect of it. But if nonprofit organizations take the H election, they're able to report on how much lobbying they are undertaking. And there is a very clear definition of what lobbying is. It is not always what you think of as lobbying. It has to be something where you are asking a policymaker to take a certain position or vote a certain way. We can do all of the education that we like. We can invite people to come to visit our services and to meet with us, but it comes into lobbying when we are asking them to do something very specific. So that, again, can be the topic of a whole future training and conversation. Great questions. Thank you. So another really important thing to do is to think about timing and when are these things actually going to happen or unfold. Usually we think that excellent leaders are looking around the corner pretty far into the future, maybe a couple years into the future. We can't do that now because so much is unknowable. And so dialing back what our time horizon is and what are today problems and what are problems that we can address in the future. And when we think about timing, not everything happens at once. One of the reasons that executive orders and other administration activities are being utilized is because they can go into effect very quickly, in hours or in days. Most legislation, though, has a 90-day window. So Governor DeWine signed 29 bills into law on January 8th. 90 days later, they went into effect earlier this month. It's when the governor signs the bill that the clock starts. During this period, or when the president signs the bill, the clock starts. This is when court action can delay temporarily or indefinitely before something goes into effect. We are deep, deep, deep in state budget deliberations. The Ohio Senate will return to Columbus next week and take up work on the budget. The House actually finished their work a little bit ahead of schedule. But the state budget won't go into effect until July 1st. So right now we are still operating under the budget that was approved or put into place 2 years ago. There are a lot of conversations about federal cuts and future federal changes that may be made. That will all go into effect in the new federal fiscal year on October 1st. And Community Solutions works a lot on Medicaid policy, the Medicaid work requirements that are being currently considered through a waiver at the federal level. Public comment just ended, and they're targeting January 2026 as when those work requirements may go into effect if they are approved. And that's still an if. I think that's actually a little fast for something that large to be implemented. And so the point is that there are decisions being made right now, but the impact of those decisions may not happen for a while. And while we are waiting, there are still opportunities to make change. This is again where until the rules are changed, we have to operate under what the current law is or the current allocations are. And then kind of the last piece in our playbook is to let go, but be strategic. We can't focus on everything. There is just too much. Again, think quietly and critically about what you can let go. Is it official yet? If the answer is no, then you have time to do advocacy. Did you receive official notice? Did experts you trust tell you to worry about it? Does it have a direct impact on your organization? How soon will the change happen? And then is this something that can be paused and later restarted? If it is something that you can temporarily pause, let it go. We are all going to have to make changes. We are in a period of constriction, and that means that we are going to have to let some nice to have things go in order to preserve what those must have things are. So this is the playbook. And I just want to take a few minutes talking a little bit about the things that I'm worried about and that Community Solutions is worried about. And it comes down to three things. The first is recession. This isn't like COVID. This is like the aftermath of the Great Recession. Previous recessions before the kind of COVID spike that happened showed that unemployment in Ohio peaks about a year after a recession officially ends in the rest of the country. Our hangover lasts longer, even if we didn't go to the party. What happens if we head into an economic recession is that tax collections will go down, unemployment will rise, need for services will increase at the very moment when state and local government have less dollars that they are able to deploy. And this time around, we know the federal government isn't going to come and bail us out. And so we'll have this double pressure of human suffering, of economic realities, and not having the resources that should be there in order to address those needs. So things getting a lot more difficult and some of those choices being even more constrained. I will also say that recession also impacts the amount of dollars that are available to philanthropy in order to grant out. They typically look at a certain percentage, and it's often a 36-month rolling average or a 12-quarter rolling average. And so if we dip into recession, that downturn stays with us for a couple of years before it may get back. Inflation can put pressures on our staff and on workers. We may have to look at layoffs, challenges that we're already starting to see as the cost of everything increases. Tariffs don't help this, but tariffs isn't something that directly impacts my organization. So that's something that I'm trying to let go as we think about what's moving forward. The second thing that I am worried about are changes to safety net programs that can't be undone. Fundamental changes which would be more difficult to rebuild once things start to settle. Some things are much more difficult to build back than others. This is where things like Medicaid trigger language comes in. If the Medicaid expansion is eliminated, that fundamentally changes the services and supports that are available to people for health and undoes a lot of the progress of the last 10 years. When I look at conversations in Congress, I get very worried because despite a number of comments that they're not going to touch Medicaid, they're not interested in cuts to Medicaid or Medicare, there's no way to do it. The math doesn't math. The federal House budget resolution cut $880 billion from the Energy and Commerce Department that oversees health programs. And you can see here Each square represents $250 billion in 10-year gross mandatory spending. There aren't enough little gray boxes to make up the total of the red boxes that would need to be cut. So something's going to have to go. I've mentioned the trigger language a number of times. This is not specific to the Medicaid program, but the current state budget has this section in it that says that if the federal government reduces, discontinues, pauses, or otherwise suspends any federal program that provides federal funds for any corresponding state program, such program may be reduced, discontinued, paused, or suspended. That means that there's no guarantees. And this is the state making sure they aren't on the hook if the federal government decides to make changes. They can still continue programs, but they don't have to under this. And then the final thing that I'm worried about is stamina. As I said, it's been less than 100 days since Inauguration Day. 3 months feels like 3 years. Here we are, and we have a long way to go. I think we're something like 6% into this federal administration. When will it end? Who knows? DOGE has a goal of $1 trillion to cut. They're at maybe $150 billion from next year's federal budget. So a long way to go. And so part of what we have to do is hold a little bit something back so that when something that truly threatens our organizations, that really directly threatens the people we seek to serve, that we have the bandwidth to be able to consider things in a clear-eyed manner and make good choices. So I'll leave you with a few suggestions about what to do right now and how to navigate these. Don't panic. We can't make good decisions if we're panicked. Keep serving your mission. Share what you know and what you do. The services that you provided were vitally important to community on January 19th, and they continue to be important today. Be sure to get your board involved. This is a time when we need to be leaning on our board members, especially those that have specialized expertise in areas like accounting or legal or advocacy or marketing, or who have connections that we're able to lean on. Learn from your board. Be sure to take calculated risks, but be sure to calculate those and don't point fingers. We are all trying to figure out how to navigate these waters, and what each organization and individual decides to do has to be decided based on their own individual circumstances. And so as long as we can continue to work collaboratively and to keep a clear focus on what's important, we can make it through these challenging waters and difficult times and come out on the other end of it using our resiliency in order to be able to rebuild in the future. And I'll leave you with this. This is almost a mantra that I keep saying to myself over and over again. You can't calm the storm, so stop trying. What you can do is calm yourself. The storm will pass. So what we are focusing on is making sure that we are still here after the storm passes in order to work on behalf of the community. So with that, I will stop. Please, if there are other questions, we will take a look at them. And thank you so much for your time today. Let me take a look at a question here. With the Trump administration issuing an executive order targeting accreditation agencies and academia, is there concern what other accreditation organizations will be targeted, and what impact would that have on nonprofit organizations? Great question, Will. I think everything is on the table these days. We don't know where some of this will stop. One of the things that we are hearing is that I'll call it a kerfuffle with Harvard, is one of the things that has paused some of the planned, or maybe not planned, we're not sure, executive orders about nonprofits this year. So, or this week, that we were expecting to see. If you take a look at that and really read into it, was it authorized? Was it not authorized? Who knows? We can only react to what we actually receive. And that's why Harvard is suing the administration. That's why we are where we are today. But if you think about it, the larger your institution, the larger the target is on your back. And there are times when you can continue to provide services even if you don't have accreditation. Often accreditation was sought so that it would unlock other sources of funding. If those sources of funding aren't there any longer, then maybe the accreditation matters a little bit less. I'm not suggesting that we compromise on quality of services. I am suggesting that we focus on what really matters, and we don't need a piece of paper in order to provide excellent services in our community. Great question. Okay, going back to the chat here. Is the trigger language in the Ohio budget regarding library funding? To my knowledge, and there may be folks on who have more knowledge about library funding, so um, please go into the chat. I do not believe that there is specific trigger language about library funding, but there's that overall broad trigger language that I shared, which covers literally everything. And so although it may not be specific, it's still may be challenging. Can we get the files shared today emailed out, please? Yes, of course. We would be happy to share those as was just posted in the chat. They will be on our website. Okay, so one of the things that I would like to encourage you to do today, we can end a few minutes early. Please take those moments to take a deep breath and to build up your strength and your stamina so that we can continue to work on behalf of our communities. That's really the most important thing, is to continue this important work and to recognize that these are external pressures, but eventually the storm will pass. So thank you all so much for your time, your attention today, for all of the work that you do in community. And of course, feel welcome to reach out. We look forward to collaborating with you in the future.
Hi, Emily. Sorry. This
Yep.
is Ebony from the Center for Community Solutions. Hi. We have one more question real
Oh,
quick.
sure.
Could you please share another example about taking calculated risks?
Oh, sure. Lots of example about kind of the calculated risk. You know, some of the things that I've been hearing organizations say is that they're going to continue doing what they're doing until someone tells them to stop. And that it takes a long time for compliance to happen, and by that time, things may change. And so that's another calculated risk. If you opt to ignore something, you know, you don't want to ignore something that's direct to you, but maybe we don't need to all do compliance in advance or rush to make changes. We really need to think about um, what are those risks. You know, another thing that I have heard about are organizations making some changes in perhaps the services that they are providing or the things that they are doing to reduce costs now so that they can continue further on. I know of at least one organization that at least temporarily furloughed some of their management staff so that they could make sure that they could continue to have their social workers working and so that their social workers wouldn't need to worry about their positions being cut. This was during a time when funding was paused. And so it really depends on whether things are paused or whether they are disappearing completely and forever, and how long can you continue? So when I think about calculated risks, I also think about what are the things that are a little bit easier, the decisions that are easier to make today so that we don't have to make a more difficult decision later. Here in Cuyahoga County, there have already been announcements about some of the things that they're going to change. They are on a hiring freeze so that they don't have to make deeper cuts later to try and anticipate some challenges and to make those little bit easier choices so we don't have to make more difficult choices later. And those are just a couple of examples about calculated risks. Thanks, Ebony, for jumping in.
And our last question, what would you say to someone who's close to giving up hope?
Oh, good question. I mean, I think the key thing is that we can't control what we can't control. There is so much that is unknowable. None of this is our fault. And it's our responsibility to try and preserve what we can in order to be here when the storm does calm. The other thing I would say is that it's okay to take a break. This information is going to be here when we come back. These things, we don't have to respond to everything overnight. And if people are starting to feel overwhelmed, it's all right to take a little break to try and build up your strength and to rely on other partners and to be open about that, about needing help. and really being able to continue on, because this is a marathon. It is not a sprint. We can't use up all our energy in these early days because who knows how long this is going to last. And that's what I would really say. Um, it's okay. It's okay to pause, to take a break, to feel overwhelmed, to do what you need to do in order to be able to wake up tomorrow and keep going. So thank you all so much for your time today, for your partnership, and look forward to collaborating in the future. Resources will be available on our website, hopefully later today. Um, and please let us know as you hear things. That would be great.